Howdy, let's complete exercise 12a, section 3.7, indirect proof. Continuing on with our examples, let's look at problem 4. We want to prove that it is not the case that both A and D are the case. We're given three premises. They all happen to be conditionals. We're going to do an indirect proof. That means we're going to assume the contradictory of that statement and then hopefully derive a contradiction. This is also called a reductio ad absurdum proof. For line 4, let's just assume the contradictory of that statement. And so we have A and D, and this is just an assumption. And as an assumption, we will place it under quarantine and then try to derive what we can based on that assumption. We'll notice that line 1 is a conditional, A is the antecedent. Line 3, we have D as an antecedent to a conditional. Hence, let's do some simplification. For line 5, we can get A from the simplification of line 4. And then we can do a modus ponens inference with lines 1 and 5. So for 6, we can get B or C by modus ponens with lines 1 and 5. We can do another simplification to get D. Some textbooks would force us to do the commutative rule first, to say D and A, and then simplify to get D. But other textbooks, such as the Suppes and Hill textbook, allows us to get the second term right away in simplification, which is nice. So we're just going to do that for line 7. D by the simplification of 1. And now we can do another modus ponens inference with lines 3 and 7. Hence for 8, we can get not C by modus ponens 3, 7. If you look closely, you see this not A here, and you also have an A on line 5. So it looks like we're going to get a contradiction with A and not A. For right now, let's look at B or C, not C, therefore B. So for 9, we can get B by our disjunctive syllogism, 6, 8. And then with B, we can do a modus ponens inference with lines 2 and 9. So for 10, we can get not A by modus ponens 2, 9. So we have not A on line 10, we have A on 5. So let's combine them for 11. A and not A conjunction, 5 and 10. We're still under quarantine. However, we have reached a contradiction that followed from this assumption. It's a faulty assumption, and so we can, outside of quarantine for line 12, deny that assumption, because that assumption cannot be the case. So not parentheses A and D, close parentheses, because we have our indirect proof with lines 4 through 11. And that concludes that proof. For number 5, we want to prove the disjunction, not E or M. This is kind of interesting because we can prove this directly in just one line. Because notice we have this disjunction S or O, but if S is the case, by modus ponens, not E will be the case, or if O is the case, then by modus ponens, M will be the case. So we can just say line 4, not E or M, because we have a constructive dilemma with lines 1, 2, and 3. And that does prove it. But of course we want to do an indirect proof, so I guess we better stick with that. I suppose doing an indirect proof will show that the constructive dilemma is a good type of inference. So let's do that. Therefore for line 4, we will assume the negation of that, the contradictory of that. So we have not parentheses, not E or M by assumption. And that's under quarantine, and then we'll try to derive a contradiction. But first, let's do De Morgan on line 4. So for 5, we can get not E and not M, De Morgan 4. Notice we have this not E, that contradicts that consequent and conditional. So let's simplify. 6, not E, simplification 5. Now we can deny the consequent to deny the antecedent. So for 7, we have not S by modus tollens, lines 2 and 6. Observe that line 1, we have a disjunction, S or O. We have not S, so by disjunctive syllogism, O must be the case in this quarantine area. So O, disjunctive syllogism, lines 1 and 7. And then we can do a modus ponens inference with lines 3 and 8. So for 9, we can get M, modus ponens, 3, 8. And notice here we have M, line 9, and we have this not M on 5, so let's simplify. For 10, we'll get not M, simplification, 5, and then we'll combine. So for 11, M and not M, conjunction, 9, 10, and we have arrived at a contradiction explicitly based on this assumption. So it's a faulty assumption, we have to deny it. So for 12, we'll say it is not the case that, not E or M. Indirect proof, lines 4 through 11. But here we have this double negation. And so for 13, I'll write it up here. We can say, therefore, not E or M by double negation of 12. And that concludes that proof. Number 6, we have not T. That's what we want to prove, given our premises. And for the heck of it, let's just do De Morgan right now on line 3. So for line 4, we can get not Q and not R by De Morgan, line 3. Actually, we can just prove this right now through a direct proof. Because we have this not Q, and through this we can get P, because we have a disjunctive syllogism. But P is contradictive to this not P, so we can then get not T. So we can do this through a direct proof, but that is not our goal here. We want to use the indirect proof technique to develop our skills. So let's just continue on with the indirect proof. So for line 5, we'll assume the opposite of that. That's just T. Assumption. Under quarantine. And then we can do a modus ponens inference, lines 2 and 5. So for 6, we get not P by modus ponens 2, 5. Line 1 is a disjunction, P or Q, but we have this not P, so therefore Q. So for 7, we can get Q, disjunctive syllogism, lines 1 and 6. But here we have a Q, and line 4 we have this not Q. So for 8, let's get not Q by the simplification of 4. And then let's combine 9, Q and not Q, conjunction, 7 and 8. So we have ended up at a contradiction, Q and not Q, based on this assumption. That assumption must be false. So outside of quarantine, 10, therefore not T by our indirect proof, lines 5 through 9. Number 7, we're to prove not parentheses T or S, close parentheses. We want to do it by indirect proof, so let's get started by assuming T or S. And notice that T or S appears as the antecedent to a conditional. So for 6, we can get R by modus ponens with 2 and 5. And R is a contradictory of not R, and not R is part of a disjunction. So for 7, let's get not R by the double negation of 6. And then by 8, we can say not B by our disjunctive syllogism with 1 and 7. Sentence 3 as a disjunction, B or not S. We're denying B by sentence 8. So for sentence 9, we can get not S by our disjunctive syllogism, 3 and 8. Sentence 5, we have a disjunction T or S. S is being denied, so for 10, we can get T by disjunctive syllogism 5 and 9. Sentence 4 is not t, and we have this t here, so for 11, we can say not t and t by a conjunction of 4 and 10. So we started with this assumption, and this leads to this contradiction. So for 12, therefore, not parentheses t or s by this indirect proof with sentences 5 through 11. Number 8, we want to prove not p. Let's just do De Morgan's law right now with sentence 3. So for 4, we'll get not t and not r by De Morgan's law in sentence 3. And then we'll say not t and r by double negation of 4. Just working on this not r part. For 6, let's now assume p. And p appears in the first sentence. If p, then not s. So by modus ponens, we can get not s with sentences 1 and 6. In sentence 2, we have s or not r. We're denying s, so we can get not r. So for 8, we get not r by disjunctive syllogism. Sentences 2 and 7. And notice, of course, that r appears right here in this conjunction in sentence 5. So for 9, we can get r by the simplification of 5. For 10, we'll say not r and r by the conjunction of 8 and 9. We've ended up at a contradiction based on a certain assumption. So for 11, we can therefore conclude that p is not the case by an indirect proof, sentences 6 through 10. For number 9, we want to prove this statement, and we're doing an indirect proof, so we will, for the 4th line, assume the contradictory of that statement, so not parentheses, not s, or not t, assumption. And then let's apply De Morgan's law. For 5, we'll get not s, and not t, De Morgan. 4, we can do double negation, although maybe we should first simplify this not s, and then we can do a modus tollens inference. So for 6, let's get not s, simplification 5. And then for 7, we can do our modus tollens, so not p, modus tollens 1, 6. Notice this not t, so that's t. Look at this, not t, so there we see a contradiction, at least a potential contradiction. Let's do this line 2, line 7. We have a disjunctive syllogism, so let's do that. So for 8, we'll get r, disjunctive syllogism, 2, 7. Yeah, so then we can do a modus ponens with line 3. So for 9, not t, modus ponens, 3, 8. And then we'll simplify this not t. So for 10, not t, simplification 5. 11, t, double negation 10. 12, we can get t and not t, conjunction 11 and 9. And so we've reached a contradiction based on this assumption. Thus, outside of quarantine for line 13, we can get not, parentheses, not S or not T, because we're denying that assumption. Indirect proof, lines 4 through 12. And then we'll apply double negation to reach our conclusion of not S or not T. And 14, of course, was a double negation of 13. Number 10, we want to prove R. And we're doing indirect proof, so let's start out with number 4, sentence 4, not R, assumption. And then from that, we do a modus ponens with 3 and 4. So for 5, we'll get not S, modus ponens, 3, 4. We have this not S, on line 1. This is a biconditional, T and R if and only if not S. For 6, let's get, because we have this not S, we'll do a modus ponens. To do that, we need if not S, then T and R, law of biconditions, line 1. And so then we can get T and R, modus ponens, 5 and 6. But here's an R, here's a not R. So for 8, let's get R by the simplification of 7, and we'll combine things. R and not R, conjunction 4 and 8. We have reached our contradiction, so we have to deny that assumption. And so for 10, we can get not R by our indirect proof, sentences 4 through 9. And then for 11, therefore, R by double negation of 10. And that's how we reach that conclusion validly. So it follows with our indirect proof. We will continue in our studies of the Suppes and Hill textbook. Up next is Chapter 3 review test. Even more interestingly, we'll be entering Chapter 4 very soon. I'm the amateur logician.